don't know me, I'm chair of the National Council for Curriculum and Assessment, and up to recently I was Secretary General in the Department of Education and Skills. So there was a couple of comments and a couple of questions, and thank you. I think the range you gave to the two speakers of what you expected them to cover in a very limited amount of time, I think was very challenging, and compliments to Noel. I might disagree with some of the things he said, but to cover such a vast history and context in a very short period of time was great. The first question I had really was about the whole issue of the equality. And I was like Emer, I heard the Bob Lingard lesson, and there is this, or lecture, and there is this issue about the wider piece about how much can schools compensate. But it's a slightly different aspect I was curious about in the Nordic system, and Noel focused very much, and I think because, and particularly in the primary, on the, if you like, religious aspect and the challenge to inclusivity in denominational education. But it strikes me going forward, we've just as much a challenge about the traditional attachment of our families and parents to parental choice of school. And if you look at it actually in primary, because everybody went to the local Catholic school, that was probably less an issue at primary, but at second level, you actually had quite a segmented, even religious secondary school system. You know, you had a middle-sized town with, you know, one Catholic secondary school with a lot lower socio-economic group than another Catholic secondary school. So it isn't just a denominational issue. And I think the going forward, as we try and deal with the issue of diversity, you know, our pattern of primary doesn't match, if you like, what the parental choice is in terms of ethos and denomination. But there is a real issue for us about what allowing parental choice will do and what level of control. And I'm curious, in the Nordic system, apart from your free schools, which or your supported schools where parents can set up their own schools, to what extent people have to, if you like, go to their local municipal school. And if you look at the reaction when the department published the enrolment policy, where we were suggesting a framework for regulation of enrolment, and where the attachment wasn't just a reaction from, if you like, religious groups, but also, I'd say, a strong view from the Irish language schools or others about rights to a waiting list, to group from their own community, not to have, and we weren't supporting. I think there's an interesting question for us. Is a Nordic system, if there is choice, because people will always go to a local system. In our case, I think while you don't get the debate you would in England, I don't think most Irish people would say, I want my child to go to an elite school in the way I hear English parents talk about it. In practice, offered a choice of a school, there is a growing, I think, segregation, and people will choose. So what's that balance between how much you change the culture? I'm just curious. Just a couple of other very quick comments on the instrumental piece. In my experience over time, if you look at the debate about doing research reform, I was involved in the 80s in structural funds, and there was very much a debate where general education was traded off against specific skills stuff. In practice, I think now employers and the economy are criticising our system for the same things that I think people are criticising it from the social end, which is the teamwork skills, the individual thinking, the rote learning. So actually maybe that's less of attention, certainly at primary and second level, maybe different. A couple just points of clarification on Noel's issue. The Department of Education Skills was called Skills when we took over all the industrial training and apprenticeship training and FOSS, and you didn't mention at all in your slide that further education skills piece. And there is there a challenge where there's a huge suspicion that we're trying to do too much general education, what should be specific skills, but that's kind of maybe a separate value issue that arises in that sort of post-18 further education. And on early childhood, just to say, we are significantly involved, I think, in, and I would agree with Noel, we have, and it's a bad thing from an education perspective, a lack of investment historically in early childhood. If the pre-4 stuff anyway, I wouldn't disagree at all with the need to be more involved. I think there has been a growing involvement with the department and the Department of Children. We have a unit that's actually co-located the literacy strategy, other issues, have tried to take on board those transitions and investment. And while I can understand Noel defending his members, the early start recommendation to get rid of was to recognising that there is more of an infrastructure and good early childhood provision linked to schools. Do you need certain specific pilots in schools? Less people thought we were busy trying to get rid of early childhood education. I think anybody in the Department of Education would like to see more investment in that space if we're to look at longer term education outcomes. So sorry, I maybe went on a bit long there, Emer.
Okay, so I'm not sure who to put that, the first question to really around parental choice.
Among us in the audience, we have an expert from the Nordic countries who will probably know more about this, but we have parental choice in the Nordic countries more and more. So parents are free to choose the school they want to send their children to. But I think perhaps, or I know that most children go to the local school. That's how it works. That's how it has always been. But there is a, we call it segregation anyway, perhaps a growing segregation in the sense that neighborhoods in our countries become more and more segregated. So that's how it works. So the well-off tend to move together with other well-off and well-educated people. So that's the way it works. So it's not happening because people are sending their children far away to a better school. It's happening because the well-off are coming together, and therefore it might be easier to run a school if all the children, when they start, could speak Danish, as opposed to other neighborhoods where they will not be able to speak Norwegian, Finnish, Danish, Swedish, but speak other languages, and therefore you have to struggle with that. So it's happening on the neighborhood level.
Thanks, Anders. I'm not sure if anyone else wants to come in on specifically that area of parental choice before we move on to the next question. Specifically on that parental choice. Yeah, okay, here in front.
Yeah, Robert Wilson, I was going to ask. Thanks. Those are excellent presentations. I was going to ask Anders, in that context, if you want to be so specific as to talk about the Swedish situation, because if I wanted to try and break out of this system, what I would want to do would be to expand the free, unquote, quote-unquote schools and parental choice associated with social segregation. And under the centre-right government in Sweden, that seems to be what's happened over the last few years. And clearly the Conservative government in the UK has wanted to try to follow that model. Do you think there's been a significant weakening of the system in Sweden as a result by comparison with the rest of the Nordics? Or do you think it's still basically in the same family of education systems?
I'm Chair Nyman from the Ministry of Education and Research in Sweden. I fully agree with you, Gert, that most people are going most pupils are going to local schools, but in Sweden we can see a difference between the big cities and the countryside. In small towns and in countrysides, most people go to local schools, but in the big cities, the free choice has meant that the most ambitious parents and most ambitious pupils send their children to schools that they believe have a high quality in teaching that. And we are, as I'm coming back to this afternoon, we are very worried about the increase in differences in school results between schools.
And just
Thank you. Patricia McDonough. I'm representing the National Association of Principals and Deputy Principals. And having visited some schools in Finland recently, it struck me that one of the reasons why parents choose their local school, in fact there's 3 of them, the outcomes from nearly all the schools in Finland are very similar. The values that are in the schools are very similar, and there's an equality in the whole society. Therefore, there's no reason for parents not to choose their local school because of these 3 reasons.
Hello everyone, Kristiina Kumpulainen from Finland. I would like to add to this important discussion also the fact that since in Finland schools and municipalities are able to engage in designing their local curriculum based on national core curriculum guidelines. Many schools tend to also specialize, have a certain character, like emphasizing arts, music, or sports, or mathematics, or ICT, and they try to gear that emphasis into the curriculum throughout, and that may attract some families and parents who possibly live in another area if they feel that their child has a particular tendency to be motivated and to learn more about such matters or in such ways that that school is promoting, they hope to have a placement in that school if that is logistically possible. But it is not to do with they think that it is a better school as such, but there may be a particular emphasis. And still these schools, they first have to fill in the number of students that live in their neighborhoods. And if there are extra seats, they can access these other students. In some cases, yes, there are entrance examinations too, particularly if you have a music school or music classroom in that school. If there is competition, you may have to go through this kind of a qualitative entrance examination, since you want to have children in that particular classroom that are already, they have dispositions towards music. So, but it is a concern also if we have more and more of these types of special schools in some way, and that may also be the case that parents who are more educated and motivated in their children's education tend to be more observant, choosing those schools. But it is of growing concern, and in media and in the ministries currently. But it's not yet like disturbing, but early alarm signals are in the air.
Thanks very much, Christina. And just to add something, also back to, I suppose, Bridget's comment about the education system can't fix everything. And when you have to start, I suppose, with the social mix in the society. You know, what is the difference between the so-called good school and so-called bad school in terms of, you know, the catchment area that it's drawing in? And obviously, if those initial differences are smaller, then the between school differences are also smaller. And that's nothing that an education system can fix. That's a broader question, I think, for society. But it's just a concern, I suppose, we have in Ireland at the moment, because, you know, there is a forum going on patronage and pluralism, and there is an increased, I suppose, public discourse around school choice. So I suppose we're just feeling our way. So, okay, so moving on then, we see.
Just to comment on the notion of parental choice, I note that concern has been expressed about a growing tendency towards segregation, I use that term very loosely, in some of the Nordic countries because of the exercise of parental choice. But that is parental choice exercised in a context of all education being free. One of the core difficulties in Ireland is that parental choice is a function or is exercised through the availability to parents of the finance to have choice. So parental choice in Ireland is, from the outset, quite a different animal. It is available first and foremost to those who have the money to create the choice for themselves. And it is, in practical terms, not available to those who are marginalised by socioeconomic circumstances. They become the automatic, necessary victims of a system of segregation that is money-based.
Finland achieved such high results in the PISA in comparison across the spectrums compared to, say, like Norway, Sweden, Denmark and Ireland are all ranked together in the 20s. Could maybe elaborate a small bit on that to me? Thank you.
Mark Lynch, just a parent from Cavan. Just a question to the panel afterwards and Noel about parents who choose perhaps to take their children out of school early in their teenage years, and if there are any developments on examining the reasons why and responding to those reasons. Perhaps some families don't see education as relevant to them. Perhaps they don't see it as giving hope to their children because of different backgrounds. Or perhaps they see it like some groups, for example, the travellers prefer to get married early and start families early, and so there aren't chances to stay in formal education. If there are any developments in providing alternative educational opportunities to these groups.
Okay, so we've two questions.
Now speaking not on behalf of the Nordic countries, but speaking on behalf of Denmark, I can tell you that Denmark is pretty low down in that PISA chart disorder. And we, of course, we are looking at Finland, who is on top. And I'll just relate to you some of the reasons being mentioned in Denmark why Finland is doing so much better than we are. First of all, it seems like teachers are better trained and educated in Finland than in Denmark. Denmark has this tradition that if you want to be a teacher in primary and secondary education, you do not go to universities. You go to a special seminarium to become a teacher. So it's not an academic education in that. It's not a research-based university education. In Finland, it is. Therefore, probably the teachers in Finland are simply better trained and educated. It's on a higher academic level. It might also mean that the profession of being a teacher in Finland is more esteemed or more attractive and better paid. It also seems that for some reason in Finland the schools and the teachers and the headmasters are better at running a discipline in the classroom. Don't ask me why, but it seems so. 3 reasons that are often advanced and put forward in the Danish debate, but I think perhaps at this point we should also invite
covering these explanations. I think those were excellent explanations that have been raised many times, but I believe it is a mixture of, and a dynamic mixture of many elements in our system that mediate these high outcome scores in PISA. But I would perhaps like to leave the Finnish perspective to these matters for the afternoon.
Great. That's great. So the second question.
Huge demand for alternative education, and there's a huge demand, and there's a rich tradition in the Nordic countries for what we would perhaps call lifelong learning. So actually providing education throughout the life of any person. And I think lifelong, I don't have the figures right here, but I think in the Nordic countries we are probably one of the places in the world where most people take part in lifelong learning. One of the areas where some of the Nordic countries have failed is to provide professional and vocational training to people who do not want to have an academic training. I think this is where we are failing, and I think this is one of the reasons why we have dropouts and why we have generations of boys, mostly young men, who don't get any education. I think it's because of failure in providing appropriate vocational training to those who want that. There has been this, how could I put it, academic drift.
It's about 600 pupil school, and I'm also a member of the Oireachtas Committee on Education, and I'm also chairperson of the Internal Committee on Fine Gael and Education. So first of all, can I say thank you very much to Noel and Anders for your very comprehensive presentations. There's just a number of issues, if you don't mind, Anders, that I'd like to raise. One is I'd like to find out exactly, about your final exams from secondary schools. Is it a once-off exam, or is it a continuous assessment throughout the children's education? I also, and you did touch on it, but when you gave your presentation, you said that there was a 2-track system and that parents could decide. You said that there was a university and a vocational. I mean, what's happened then later in your last answer, you said that the boys in particular aren't going towards vocational. What I was going to ask you is, how do you you know, motivate boys, or how do you decide who goes through the vocational track and who goes through the university? I'm really interested in that your children don't go to school until 7 years of age, and I just wonder, what do they do? Is there a preschool? You know, is it funded? You know, it sounds really like apple pie and all of that, but I'm just wondering, because we had that here in Ireland, and what we brought in was even a break the cycle scheme, which was publicly funded to try and ensure the children were looked after, you know, before they came to school. I'd also like to ask you about how many subjects the children study in primary school and in secondary school. I think that's about it, but well done both of you. I think it was very interesting Warren's presentation. Thank you.
Okay, so
John Lawler, CEO of Scouting Ireland and formerly director of the Bridge 21 programme at Trinity College. I think that Noel drew a lovely historical journey for us, and it raises a question of whether we're at a philosophical crossroads. There are basically two models to work with children. One is policing and control, and the other is trust and responsibility. And I wonder, has our history led us too far down the road of policing and control? And perhaps that's the challenge that the Nordic models are throwing up to us, as shown from Andrew's presentation. I was very interested in this idea of time out of school, because it seems to me if we go for the Anglo-Saxon approach, we will drive to a system of more and more time in school. Emer Smith's work with ERSI last year pointed to the grind culture. I did some back of the envelope work on this one, and I reckon that Irish parents are paying out not less than €4 million per week on grinds. If organised crime finds out about this, they're going to take it over.
Ryan's being extra help with preparing to do exams.
So this raises the question of the disconnect between theory and practice. It would be hard to imagine a discipline like medicine or engineering that would ignore its own theory in favour of applying a practice based on a system. And I think that's perhaps where we've got into with education in Ireland. I absolutely agree with Noel's view that we have an excellent cohort of teachers, but have we trapped them in a system that prevents them from being as good as they could be?
Okay, thanks very much.
Mr. Newell from Swedish Education, Minister of Education. I thought that you, Mr. Anderson, and Anders Geertsen gave a very good summarize of the core values and what is common in the Nordic systems. But we are also influenced by other countries, and in Sweden we see a tendency that we are very much influenced by UK and other Anglo-Saxon countries. For example, we are introducing more of accountability in the Swedish education system. Do you see a similar development in other Nordic countries, and do you think that could in some way change the core values of the Nordic system in the future?